There is a saying among the people who live in these mountains. Not the people who visit them, the tourists, the weekend hikers with their brand new gear and their optimistic weather apps. I mean the people who actually live up here. The ones who stay through February when the pass is close and the radio signal dies and the only sound for 3 days straight is wind that sounds like it has a grudge. They say, the mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. I've lived on this mountain for 2 years and 11 months. I know what that means now in a way I didn't know when I first came here. I know it the way you know something in your bones, not from reading about it, not from being told, but from standing in it at 2 in the morning in a Colorado whiteout with your lungs full of ice and your headlamp cutting exactly 4 feet into absolute white nothing. That night, the night I'm telling you about, I thought I was making a choice. I thought I saw a shape in the snow 50 yards from my cabin and I thought, that's a person. That person is dying. I'm going to go get them. I thought I was doing what any decent human being would do. I thought I was saving a life. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have known as I dragged that heavy hooded figure through my doorway and kicked the door shut against 40 miles per hour of frozen rage, was that the mountain hadn't made a mistake that night. I had. And I'd made it 3 years ago, 1,000 miles away in a glass office building in Seattle. And whatever I thought I'd left behind in that city, whatever I believed I'd escaped by driving until the roads ran out and building a life in a place that required real effort to reach, it had found me. It was lying on my floor, half frozen, wrapped in a coat that cost more than my truck. And it had a photograph of me in its pocket. Let me tell you about the cabin first. Because you need to understand what I built here, not just the physical structure, though I built that too with my own hands and a level and a dog-eared copy of a structural engineering manual that I practically had memorized, but what it represented. What I came here to escape. What I was trying to become in a place where nobody knew my name. My name is Daniel Mercer. Before the mountain I was a civil engineer. Not a famous one, not a wealthy one, a precise one. The kind of engineer who double-checks the double-checks. The kind who loses sleep over load calculations not because his boss tells him to but because he genuinely cannot sleep if the numbers aren't right. If you had asked anyone I worked with to describe me in one word, most of them would have said, thorough. One of them, the one who mattered, would have said, inconvenient. The project was a bridge. Infrastructure contract, public funding, the kind of job that gets your firm's name in the newspaper and your senior partners invited to civic dinners. The Caldwell-Marsden Bridge, commissioned, designed, and on paper, completed. A beautiful piece of engineering. The renderings were extraordinary. The actual load-bearing calculations were not. I found the discrepancy on a Thursday afternoon in March, 3 years ago. Error, not a rounding error, not a minor variance, but a fundamental flaw in the stress distribution model that would have made that bridge dangerous. Not immediately. Not visibly. But over time, under repeated load, in conditions that Colorado winters produce regularly. I reported it. I reported it to my direct supervisor. Then to the project lead. Then, when both of those conversations produced nothing but extremely uncomfortable silences and then extremely formal emails about process and chain of command, I reported it to the State Engineering Board. The bridge was reviewed. The flaw was confirmed. The contract was pulled. The firm lost the project. The partners lost a great deal of money. And I lost everything else. Not immediately, that's never how it works. First came the quiet campaign. The whisper network that operates in every professional world, the one that doesn't leave written records. The version of events that spread through the industry, not that I'd found a dangerous flaw and prevented a potential catastrophe, but that I was difficult, unstable, someone who'd manufactured a crisis for personal reasons. Someone not to be trusted with sensitive work. Then came the job market. Then came the savings. Then came the morning I woke up in my apartment in Seattle and understood, with the clarity that only arrives after everything else has fallen away, that I had 2 options. Stay. Fight a battle on terrain controlled entirely by the people who wanted me silent. Or leave. Find somewhere that required enough of me physically that the other parts, the anger, the grief, the specific humiliation of being right and being punished for it, might quiet down enough to let me breathe. I drove east. Then south. Then up. The cabin took 4 months to build. The first winter nearly broke me. The second winter made me. By the third, I had a rhythm, firewood stacked 6 weeks deep, a hand pump well that worked in temperatures down to -20, a root cellar that would have impressed my grandfather, and a drafting table by the south window where I worked on personal projects that no one would ever review and no one could ever take from me. I was, if not happy, then at least something adjacent to it. Something that had the shape of peace. And then the storm came. I'd been watching it build for 2 days. The barometric pressure dropping in the way that serious weather announces itself up here, Not with drama but with a quiet, certain heaviness that you learn to recognize the way you learn to recognize the sound of a structure under strain. Something giving way before it breaks. I had no reason to go outside that night. My wood was in. My food was in. My lamp was full. Every rational part of my engineer's brain said, stay inside. Wait it out. The storm will pass. But at approximately 11:40 p.m., my motion-sensitive perimeter light, a simple system I'd rigged from a salvaged solar panel and a hardware store sensor, came on. And through the cabin's one south-facing window, I saw a shape in the snow. It wasn't moving. I put on everything I had. I went out. He was face down, approximately 50 meters from my door, in snow that had already drifted to his mid-thigh. His coat was extraordinary. I registered that even then, even through the wind, the specific quality of the fabric. Expedition grade. Not what you wore for a casual mountain hike. His gloves were still on, which was the detail that told me he had maybe minutes left. When people in extreme cold start removing their clothes and gloves, the medical term for what's happening is paradoxical undressing, and it means the end is very close. His were still on. There was still time. I got him inside. I got the coat off him and got it near the fire. I got blankets on him. I checked his extremities, fingers, toes, ears, for the waxy white color and texture that indicates deep frostbite. His fingers were borderline. His face had been protected. His core temperature, based on the shivering response that started when he began to warm, was low but not catastrophically so. He was going to live. I made hot water. I worked methodically, the way I always work, the way that used to make people call me robotic until they needed someone to not panic, at which point it made people call me invaluable. I was reaching for his coat to hang it properly near the fire when something fell from the inside pocket. Small. Laminated. The size of a hotel key card. I picked it up. It was a photograph. Not of a family. Not of a wife or a child. Not of any of the things a man carries in his coat pocket in the mountains. It was a photograph of me. Taken through the trees. Long lens. My cabin's south window visible in the background. Time stamp on the border, 48 hours ago. My heart didn't skip. It stopped. Fully and completely, the way a machine stops when the power is cut. Not a skip, not a stutter, but a sudden and total cessation. He wasn't lost. He wasn't hiking. He wasn't a victim of the storm. He was watching me. He had been watching me for at least 2 days. And he had been good enough at it that I hadn't known. I put the photograph back where I found it. This is important. I want you to understand why I put it back rather than confronting him immediately, because I know what the instinct is. The instinct is to wake him up, to put the photograph on the table between you, to demand answers. The instinct is the direct approach. The direct approach, in my experience, is what you use when you have leverage. I didn't have leverage yet. I had a question and a semi-conscious stranger and a blizzard outside that meant neither of us was going anywhere until morning at the earliest. What I had, in other words, was time. I used it. I went through his gear. Not his personal pockets, not yet. His pack, which he'd had strapped to his back and which I'd removed during the initial rescue without registering its contents. I laid it on my workbench under the lamp and I went through it with the methodical attention I give to everything. Item: navigation equipment. GPS unit, not a consumer model. Professional grade. The kind that costs $1,200 and is accurate to within 2 meters in any condition. The kind that outdoor enthusiasts don't buy and field operatives do. Item: rations. Not trail mix and energy bars. Freeze-dried military-spec meal packets. The kind that have a 5-year shelf life and are designed to be consumed under conditions of sustained physical stress. 8 of them. Item: a satellite phone. Scratched. Used. 1 contact saved in the memory. The contact name was not a person's name. It was 2 words, the firm. I set the phone down on the workbench and I stood very still for a moment and I let the implications arrange themselves in my mind the way load calculations arrange themselves. Not emotionally, not reactively, but structurally. If A then B. If B then C. Follow the weight to where it's resting. The firm. I knew exactly what that meant. Not because it was my term, it wasn't. It was what the people I'd reported to the engineering board had called their backers, their money, the network of investors and contractors who had a financial interest in the Caldwell-Marsden project going forward exactly as designed, flaws and all. I had heard the term exactly once, in a phone call I was not meant to hear, through a conference room door that was not quite fully closed, 6 days before I was formally let go. The firm wants this handled quietly. The firm doesn't want another whistleblower situation. The firm will not tolerate. The door had closed before I heard the end of that sentence. I had spent 2 years and 11 months wondering how it ended. The man on my floor had a satellite phone with one contact. And that contact was the organization that had dismantled my career and sent me to a mountain in Colorado to rebuild a life from scratch. I went back to the fire. I sat in my chair. I watched him breathe. He was well built. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. The kind of physical condition that doesn't happen accidentally, maintained, deliberate, the body of someone who stays ready for things that require readiness. His face, now that the color was returning to it, had the specific quality of someone who had spent a significant portion of their life being unreadable. Not blank, unreadable. There is a difference. Blank faces are empty. Unreadable faces are full of something they have decided not to show. I recognized the quality. I had cultivated it myself in the years since Seattle. I thought about the photograph in his coat. I thought about the satellite phone on my workbench. I thought about the North Ridge Trail, which was the only plausible approach to my cabin from the direction he'd been found, and which had been impassable since October when a rock slide took out the lower switchbacks. I thought about the private access road I'd built myself 18 months ago, from salvaged materials and 3 weeks of the hardest physical labor of my life. The road that wasn't on any map. The road that required knowing it existed before you could find it. He hadn't come up the North Ridge. He'd come up my road. Which meant he'd known about my road. Which meant someone had told him. Which meant this was not a reconnaissance mission by a lone operator. This was an organized effort, with research behind it, with resources behind it, with the specific targeting energy of people who had decided that 2 years and 11 months of silence from Daniel Mercer was enough and that it was time to close whatever loop remained open. I moved the satellite phone back to his pack. I moved the pack back to where I'd found it. I sat down in my chair by the fire, and I put a mug of hot water in my hand, and I made my face into the specific arrangement of a man who has spent a quiet evening alone and is mildly concerned about his unexpected guest and nothing else. He was going to wake up thinking he had the advantage. I was going to let him think that, for a while. His eyes opened at 12:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock on my workbench, the mechanical one I'd bought specifically because it required no batteries and kept perfect time. I am an engineer. I note times. I note details. I note the small inconsistencies that other people smooth over because they're in a hurry or because the inconsistencies are inconvenient. He opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling, and then he looked at the fire, and then he looked at me. And he performed confusion. I want to give him credit, it was a good performance. The slight disorientation, the careful look around the room, the hand that went to his head in the universal gesture of where am I and what happened. He did all of it correctly. He had clearly done it before or something like it, in situations that required him to establish a baseline of apparent helplessness before he figured out what he was dealing with. Easy, I said. You're safe. I found you in the snow about 50 meters from the cabin. You were in bad shape. He processed this. Or performed processing it. Thank you. His voice was hoarse, which was genuine. The cold does that. I must have gotten turned around on the trail. Happens, I said. What trail were you on? North Ridge. I was trying to make the lower campsite before the storm hit and North Ridge has been closed since October, I said. Pleasantly. Conversationally. The way you mention a minor factual detail to a stranger who has gotten slightly turned around. Rock slide took out the lower approach. There's signage at the trailhead. Have been for 8 weeks. A small pause. Almost imperceptible. I must have missed the sign, he said. Must have. I nodded. I sipped from my mug. Where'd you park? Another pause. This one slightly longer. The lot at the base of the North Ridge trailhead. I looked at the fire. That lot's been gated since October too. Same time as the trail closure. Forest Service locks it for the season. I looked back at him. So where'd you actually park? He looked at me. I looked at him. For approximately 4 seconds, we were both exactly who we actually were. Not a confused hiker and a helpful mountain hermit, but two people who understood precisely what was happening and were each deciding in real time how to proceed. He made his decision first. You're sharper than they said you were, he said. Who said? People who underestimated you. He pushed himself up slowly to a sitting position. He moved carefully, not the careful movement of someone still impaired by the cold, but the careful movement of someone respecting the dynamics of a room they don't yet fully control. My name is Garrett. I work for a private investigation firm that has been retained by a group of parties with an interest in the Caldwell-Marsden project. The firm? I said. He didn't react to that. I'm not here to threaten you, Mr. Mercer. People who aren't here to threaten me generally don't surveil my cabin for 48 hours before introducing themselves. We needed to know if you were still, he paused, choosing the word, engaged with the material. Engaged with the material, I repeated. You mean the calculations? The original stress distribution models? Yes. The ones that proved the bridge design was structurally fraudulent. The ones that are the only remaining evidence that would hold up in a federal investigation, he said. Yes. I looked at him for a long moment. I'm good at long moments. I've had a great deal of practice. You said retained, I said. By parties with an interest. What parties? Former investors. Engineers who signed off on the project under duress. 3 of them have been living with what they know for 3 years. One of them is sick. He wants the record corrected before. Garrett stopped. He wants it corrected. They all do. The firm itself is fracturing. The principals are turning on each other. There are federal investigators who have been building a case, but the case has a gap. The original calculations. Your original calculations. The ones that disappeared from the project files the week after you were terminated. They didn't disappear, I said. Garrett was quiet. I still have them, I said. He closed his eyes briefly. The first genuine emotion he'd shown since waking up. Not relief exactly, but the specific release of tension that comes when something you've been hoping is true turns out to be true. Mr. Mercer, he said. Daniel. I know what they did to you. I know what it cost you. I know that walking back into this, into any of it, asks something of you that you have no obligation to give. He looked around the cabin. At the workbench. At the drafting table. At the 3 years of a life I'd built out of nothing in a place that asked everything of me just to survive. But people used that bridge, he said. People are still using a version of it. The redesign is based on the same firm's models. And if someone gets hurt. I know, I said. The math. I know, I said again. And I did know. I had always known. It was the thing I had moved 500 miles to not know, and it had followed me here in the coat pocket of a half-frozen investigator who'd come up my private road in the middle of a blizzard. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. I had made one 3 years ago. Not the reporting, that had been right. But the retreating. The decision to stop fighting when the fight got expensive. The daily choice, repeated for almost 3 years, to stay up here with my numbers and my lamp and my approximation of peace while the people who'd buried my work continued to operate as though it had never existed. That was the mistake. And now it was sitting in my living room, looking at me with the careful eyes of a man who was very good at reading rooms, and asking me to fix it. I got up. I went to the drafting table. There is a compartment built into the underside, not a secret compartment exactly, but one that required knowing it was there to find. I'd built it myself before the first winter because I am an engineer and I understand that the most important things need redundant protection. Inside it, a sealed waterproof document case. Inside that, a USB drive, a set of printed schematics and 12 pages of hand-calculated stress distribution analysis in my own handwriting, using methods that predated the digital model and that would hold up to any level of peer review. 3 years old. Completely intact. I set the case on the table without opening it. I stood there looking at it. I thought about what it had cost me to have this. The career. The professional network. The apartment in Seattle with the view of the water. The version of a life that I had believed I was building before the Thursday afternoon in March when I found the discrepancy and made the choice that changed everything. I thought about the alternative, the version of Daniel Mercer who had found the discrepancy and said nothing, who had rationalized it, who had told himself that it was probably fine, that smarter people than him had reviewed the models, that it wasn't his place to upend a multimillion-dollar contract over calculations that maybe, possibly, under certain conditions, might become a problem. I had never been that man. I couldn't be. It wasn't a moral position exactly, it was structural. The way some things can't carry weight they're not designed for. I looked at Garrett. He was watching me with the particular patience of someone who has learned to let silence do the work. The people who retained you, I said. The investors. The engineers who signed off under duress. When the federal case goes forward, they're cooperating? Fully. Immunity agreements are in place for the ones who cooperate. The principals, the ones who built the pressure to approve the fraudulent design, they're the targets. And the bridge? The current version. The investigation will require an independent structural review. Your calculations would establish the baseline for what the original design should have been. It would demonstrate the deliberate deviation. And my name? Garrett was quiet for a moment. I can't promise you anything about your name, he said. I can tell you that the people who retain me want the truth on record. What the truth does to the reputations of the people who buried it? He looked at me steadily. Tends to be proportional. I nodded. I looked at the drafting table one more time. At the lamp. At the window where the darkness was beginning, barely at the edges, to soften toward something that might eventually become dawn. I thought about the thing Pastor Welch says in a different story, about how you can't keep running from a truth that you're carrying. About how the weight of an unresolved thing doesn't get lighter with distance. About how peace that depends on silence isn't peace at all. I'm not a pastor. I'm an engineer. But the math works the same way. An unbalanced equation doesn't become balanced just because you stop looking at it. I picked up the document case. There's a road, I said. Private. Not on any map. If we leave by 7 we can reach the main highway before the secondary roads refreeze. I looked at him. Can you walk? Garrett stood. Slowly but without help. I can walk, he said. Then get your coat. The storm broke at 6:14 a.m. I know the exact time. I stood in the doorway of the cabin and watched the last of the clouds pull east like something finished with its work. The sky behind them was the specific color of winter dawn at altitude. Not warm, not cold exactly, but luminous. The kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it's been left behind by something larger. The snow was undisturbed in every direction. White and absolute and new. And then there were 2 sets of tracks moving away from the door. Mine. And his. Heading toward the road. Heading down. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. But maybe, if you're paying attention and if you're willing to walk back toward the thing you've been running from, maybe it gives you a second chance to fix them. I had spent 3 years building a life designed around the absence of consequence. A cabin on a mountain. A workbench with no deadlines. Numbers that no one would review and no one could take from me. I thought that was freedom. But the document case in my hand, the one I'd been protecting for 3 years without knowing exactly why, without knowing if I'd ever have the chance or the courage to use it, that was the real thing. That was the work that had always been waiting for me to come back to it. The math had to balance. It always does in the end. We reached the main highway at 8:43 a.m. Garrett made a call on his satellite phone. I didn't ask to whom. I stood in the road and looked back up at the mountain. It was already small from this distance. Already returning to the thing it had been before I arrived. Indifferent, enormous, present in the way that only things that have been here far longer than you have can be present. Thank you, I thought. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the morning. So here's what I want to leave you with. There are things we bury because the truth is expensive. Because being right costs more than being silent. Because sometimes you look at the price of honesty and you make the calculation that isolation is cheaper. It isn't. The truth has its own gravity. You can move away from it, but you cannot change its mass. Eventually, in a blizzard, in a document case, in a half-frozen stranger at your door, it finds you. The only real question is what you do when it does. Do you hide the photograph back in the coat pocket and play dumb? Or do you sit in your chair and wait for the right moment, and ask the question that cuts through all of it? You said you came from the North Ridge Trail. But the North Ridge has been closed since October. What would you do? If your past showed up at your door, freezing, urgent, asking for something only you can give, would you open it? Tell me in the comments. And if this story found you at the right moment, you know what to do.